Is today's host, Simon Parks.
Hello, I thought I was the guest, not the host.
You're the host, I'm the producer.
Oh, you've been promoted overnight.
Yeah, well, I sort of demoted. But yeah, this is your show.
Lovely to chat again with you.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Yeah, and it's really lovely to obviously have the audience and speak to them. I think spring is coming. The weather's really improving. So anyway, that's my small talk. I'm not very good at small talk. Apparently that's why people like me.
That's good. I like big talk too.
I've got quite a lot to get through before we take the questions. Very serious stuff. So I want to move on to that straight away. We obviously here in Great Britain had a terror attack. As quite who orchestrated that or what its purpose was, that's not for debate now. But we had a terror attack. And there have been a number of people who have looked at the video footage that was taken immediately after the attack and have been able to take information from that which would give them an indication of where the next attack was going to be scheduled. And they're coming out with something to do with the Statue of Liberty. Now, that means, of course, that everyone, quite understandably, would think of New York, the gateway, and think there's going to be an attack there. But it is not New York and it's not America. Now, I have a problem. Because if I now say, because I know where this attack is going to take place and I also know the date of the attack, if I do this, two things are going to happen. The first thing is that the attack won't take place. The way the evil Illuminati work, by hiding things in plain sight, that one of the reasons they have to do that is that if it's detected and it's put out there energetically, then it either puts it back or it scrubs it and they have to find another target. If people think back to the Terminator II movie, which I think was about 1991, and I had, in my early days on presentations, had shown the section where the bridge height was 9-11. So everybody thought that meant that the bridge was 9 yards or 9 feet or whatever it was, stroke 11. And we all know, of course, now that was Hollywood telling us that 9/11 was going to be something quite disastrous. Had somebody detected that, made a presentation or gone on a radio show, then they would have had to have put that back. The difficulty is that not so long ago, a commentator called Michael Shrimpton, who incidentally is sharing a platform, doing a conference in a couple of months' time down just north of London. I'm sharing a platform with him as a speaker. He went public and said that there was going to be some form of terrorist attack at the Olympics, the London Olympics, which were in 2012. Because of that, he was taken to court and imprisoned. It wasn't a very long sentence, but he was imprisoned. So if I now give the name of this town or city and say there's going to be an attack, I face the possibility of going to prison. Excuse me. Now, people could say, well, that's what you're here for, that, to put out in the news and, you could be a martyr. The problem I have with that is that if I do go to prison, I can't do any more warnings because I won't be able to talk to you. There'll be no more radio shows, there'll be no more conferences, and I won't be able to pass on any more information. So I've got to be quite clever in the wording I use. I can't say to you that this town or that town there's going to be a terror attack. Now, I've got a conference next Saturday at High Elms, which is just north of London, and I'm going to be going into this in a great more detail. But what I will say to you is that we'll just change the subject now. We're going to talk about a completely different subject. I've got a friend who lives in Leicester, and I'm not going to go to Leicester on the 29th of April. Right, let's go on to something else now.
Moving swiftly on,
Yep, I'm going to talk about finance now. Situation in America. We've been looking very carefully, and on my website I've been covering the situation on the Dow Jones stocks and shares. President Trump has decided to literally take the Fed on head on. What he wants to do is what we were talking about last year, which is basically to move to a silver dollar, if possible. He wants to completely take away the power of the what we would call corporate America. I don't mean in terms of the corporations, but in terms of understanding America as a corporation rather than through the Constitution. And what Trump is doing is trying to put America back as the original founding fathers envisaged America to be, and not as it was hijacked fairly recently, actually, to become a huge corporate entity, which meant it owned the people. It owned the citizens of America, whereas under the original idea of the founding fathers, every man and woman and child was free. So what we're looking for here is a very important meeting which is coming up between America and China. I think China's distrust of Trump is less than its distrust of the Fed. So I'm looking, as a key indicator here would be for China and America to agree to disagree, for them to say we can get along together, rather than China walking out of the meeting, which under normal circumstances it would do, because America is going to basically put a trade embargo on China and say that if you want to sell anything to us in America, we're going to hit you with goodness knows what taxes. But I think that the destruction of the Fed and the removal of the paper money, which is going to have a global effect positively, will be something that China will actually go behind. So watch for that one. It doesn't mean anything to people in Britain or Europe, but there's a guy in America called Tony Robbins, and somebody sent me a link on that, so thank you very much indeed, because I was going to talk about his book. He's not paying me to push his book, but his book is called The Crash is Coming. Now, it's on YouTube, and he was interviewed on Fox 5, so that's an established television. It's not an alternative true station, it's an establishment station. And he's basically interviewed, yes, he's pushing his book, but his whole point is that there's a big crash coming. Now, if you think back just 6 months ago when I and a few others were talking about this crash, the establishment weren't touching it at all. But now the mainstream are touching it because they can't ignore what's coming. So it's important to understand that, you know, that the people in the alternative news, the true news, do lead the way, do trailblaze, and the establishment are dragged kicking and screaming behind, having to admit to it. All right, moving on quickly. Still a great interest in Antarctica, and if you've got 5 minutes, then go and have a look, because a map in 1513 AD was drawn of Antarctica showing no ice. Now, it didn't mean in 1513 that there was no ice then, but it meant that somebody who drew the map in 1513 had access to ancient maps that were drawn before Antarctica was covered in ice, and that has to be something around 15,000 years ago. Now, our listeners will be really familiar with Admiral Byrd and the fact that he went off to Antarctica, and it was called Operation High Jump, 1946-1947. What many people don't really realise is that Admiral Byrd had flown over Antarctica in the 1920s twice and the 1930s twice. He was also a Freemason. And he was chosen to go there and have a look. And he also went with another guy called Admiral Forrestal. And Forrestal was actually chosen by the president to be the Secretary of Defense for the Navy. And Admiral Forrestal allegedly jumped out of a 16-story window hospital to his death. I believe he was thrown out because he was about to go public with what was in Antarctica right back in the late 40s. So we need to be watching this, and that's one of the reasons actually why the US Navy plays a key role in dealing with off-planet entities, and always has done. And you've only got to look at Star Trek, and of course what do they call them? They call them ships. So the Navy's ships have always held an important point, and so the secret space program, the Navy has quite a strong say, although it's normally the Air Force that has the main lead on that. Okay, moving quickly on to the military situation. The Ukrainian government has nearly run out of money. You remember all the sort of pretend war that was going on there a year ago, and they're on the verge of asking Russia to admit them back. So the Ukraine government is on the verge of asking President Putin if, please, will he take them back. You can imagine the reaction with some of the people in the military over this side of the water, and as a result of that there is currently a 40,000 troop exercise in Poland, American troops, many more tanks than you would actually need, thousands of tanks and military vehicles. This is not to put pressure on President Putin, they wouldn't dare do that now, but this is to put pressure on the Ukraine government to try to force them not to go back to Russia. So there's a lot going on there, keep your eye on that. The other thing is, interestingly enough, that we sometimes have questions about Lucifer and Satan, and I'm not the first person to bring this up, but I perhaps can add a little bit more to it. The satanic control network across the planet has been decapitated. Now the satanic control element is actually artificial intelligence. It's basically a plasma field that exists around what we call the dark sun, right back to Hitler and the Sumerian times, Babylonian times. The hidden sun, or the dark sun, is a binary sun. It's a sun that we don't see with our naked eye. But artificial intelligence has created a world or a life-giving environment around that. And it has been faced off by something else. Now, whether that something else is divine source, or whether it's a more native, natural form of AI, I can't say at the moment, but there has been a standoff between the two, and the result has been that the next tier of Satanists down on the planet have no leadership, and they've gone into, not meltdown, they've gone into panic, and that is why so many people around the globe are emailing me or texting me, telling me that the number of chemtrails has gone through the roof. And I'd actually said last time round that we should expect that, because they had the chance, the elite, the nasty elite had the chance to come over to the light. They chose not to, and they are so hell-bent now on not losing control, they've got no leadership, that they have just gone absolutely crazy with the chemtrailing. So please keep emailing me, and if your state or your county or your town has suddenly been absolutely inundated, and please take some photographs, because what they're now doing is hitting it with HARP. So whereas before you would just get the chemtrails and the occasional HARP, now they seem to be absolutely exciting as many chemtrails as they possibly can. So keep your eye on that one, please. Edward Snowden, remember Edward Snowden? He was a whistleblower, and he's now in hiding in Russia. Edward Snowden has recently released some information saying that ET is trying to contact the Earth. Now, of course, we all know that not only has ET contacted the Earth, but the elite are in communication with ET. What I think Edward Snowden is saying is that another group of very benign aliens are attempting to connect with Earth, and I can actually absolutely confirm that. And I would change the wording. What Edward Snowden is saying is ET is trying to contact the Earth, the people of the Earth, and I would change that to that they are in communication. So this is then a uniquely new group. It's a very beneficial group who have always been there, but are in a direct communication, and they're not in communication with the military, and they're not in communication with the politicians. So that's an interesting one. I'm nearly finished. About 2 years ago, I went public and warned people how Samsung televisions, mobile phones, some of those models were listening in to people's conversations and passing that information on. About 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I can't remember now, not good with time on this planet, WikiLeaks released a whole tranche of information, and one of them was exactly what I, and I'm sure other people had been saying, which is in relation to how some products from Samsung have been listening in. What was important was it made it onto mainstream news, and not just mainstream news, the front pages of some British major newspapers. This is unheard of. Establishment major newspapers carrying front page news from WikiLeaks. And it actually confirmed what I and others have said, that even when some of these model of Samsung televisions are turned off, they are still listening to your communications, your conversations, as are mobile phones. Now, why Ed Snowden was made the point was that it's not just that this information is being sold on to another party. You go to a store and you look at a new motor car and you think, yeah, it's a nice car, and a salesman or woman comes out and talks to you, and you have a debate about it, and you go home, and an hour later you go on Facebook and suddenly there's that model of that car, at a even cheaper price than what you were looking at. And obviously what's happened is that your communication or your conversation with your mobile phone in your pocket has picked that up and sold that information to a car dealership. That's capitalism. That's going to happen. But what Ed Snowden's talking about is the National Security Agency also taking everybody's conversation in front of a telephone when the phone is turned off, and in front of some models of these televisions when they're turned off. Now, why would an organization want to have all of our conversations when we're just discussing the price of chocolate, or the latest beer that's available? So I wanted to give everyone the news, and we'll just go back to the first one where we talked literally about the potential trouble in Britain. And I am going to discuss this a lot more at my conference. Now, I'm doing this conference on Saturday, but I won't be hanging about. So normally I hang around for a little bit, but I do have to get away very smartish. So I will do the presentation and then I will just hang on for a few minutes. I won't be going to the evening meal. But if people are about and they can come, they'll grab me during the break times, the tea breaks, and I'll be happy to talk to you then. All right, JP, it was a very serious bit of information I had to give today. So we will go on, I think.
But just going